begin our lunch presentation. So I want to introduce first to you Mario Garcia. He is the acting commander for the California Cybersecurity Integration Center up in Sacramento. He is an amazing partner if you haven't met him yet in public sector or private sector. You're going to want to meet him also. But I'm going to have him come on up, and he's going to introduce our keynote speakers from the state of Colorado. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Real briefly, just a little bit about the California Cybersecurity Integration Center, or the CalCIC. So we serve as that operations center or the central hub of the state's cybersecurity activities. And by that, what the state was trying to do some years ago when they formed us was there's multiple agencies that all have a stake and have a role in cybersecurity within California. And so what they did is they brought us all cybersecurity specialists from each of those agencies into a central facility. So we operate very much like a fusion center or an operations center so that we can coordinate our efforts. So we refer to them as the Core Four, but it's the California Highway Patrol, the California Department of Technology, the California Military Department, you might know them as the National Guard, Air and Army National Guard, and then my office, the California Governor's Office of Emergency Management. And so our job is to do everything that we can to possibly reduce the likelihood of cyber attacks, and when they do happen, reduce the scale or the impact of those cyber events. We also do information sharing with our federal, state, and local partners and the private sector as well. We try to ingest as much information as we possibly can, decide what may most likely impact California, either all of California or a particular sector, and then prioritize that and send out just the most important stuff that people need to pay attention to that we feel are the most important, significant threats. And then what we also do is incident response, coordinate incident response either with our own team or with representatives of those four core agencies to respond on site to whichever incident requires our assistance. So with that as kind of the context, I was out in Old Sacramento, for those of you that have ever been to Sacramento. So meeting with some friends, I think it was about 6 or 7 o'clock, so I already had a couple of cocktails, adult beverages, and all of a sudden I get this phone call on my work phone, which I carry two now. I get this phone call on my work phone that says, hey, just to let you know, the governor of Colorado just declared a state of emergency for a cyber event, and Colorado is asking for some assistance. We want to send a team. Can you do this? I'm like, okay, absolutely. When do you want them? And so they're like, as soon as possible. So the rest of the evening was kind of planning that out and thinking through who the team's going to be, what the logistics are for us to send that. But ever since that night, I've been pumped up about, I don't want to sound, like I'm relishing in somebody else's event, but there's always something to be learned from an incident that happens, especially since this is, to my knowledge, the only, or at least the first declared state of emergency for a cyber incident. And so what you're going to find out today, what you're going to hear from these two speakers, is how their two pieces came together to respond to this incident, both the emergency management side as well as the cybersecurity side. And it's very important. I don't know all of your roles, but I'm guessing that most of you, if not all of you, are in IT or IT security. Your job is to protect your agency from cyber attack. When an incident happens, your leadership's likely response is going to be to put everything on your shoulders. And what you're going to find out very fast is that you can't do it all yourself. You're going to have to ask for help. And so the sooner that you start thinking along those lines and figuring out who within your agency has the right tool sets and the right resources to help you in this, or take as much off your plate as possible to allow you to focus on the incident at hand, the better. So plan ahead of time is going to be the key. So again, I'm going to introduce these two folks. I hope you're as excited as I am about hearing what we've got, because it's a very unique experience. And I hope they don't start charging for their presentations, because I want to bring them out to California as often as I possibly can. So first I want to introduce Deborah Blyth. Deborah Blyth is the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Colorado. In August 2014, Debbi Blyth became the state's Chief Information Security Officer, bringing a diverse background, including 14 years of information security experience. As a CISO, she serves as the point of contact for all information security initiatives in Colorado, informing the Secretary of Technology and Chief Information Officer and executive agency leadership on security risks and impacts of policy and management decisions on IT-related initiatives. Before joining OIT, Debbi spent 5 years as an executive director at Teletech, leading the information security and IT compliance program. Among her many achievements, Debbi built the business case and led a 2-year effort to evolve and mature the information security program there. Also, as information technology security and compliance manager at Travelport, Debbi was responsible for establishing and managing a global enterprise information security and compliance program. During her tenure, Debbi led the endeavor to achieve compliance with the payment card industry data security standard for the company's first time in 2007. She is going to be accompanied by Michael Willis, Director of the Colorado Office of Emergency Management. Michael Willis is the Director of Emergency Management for the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. He is responsible for the state of Colorado's comprehensive emergency management program, which supports local and state agencies. Prior to joining the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, Michael served in the Colorado National Guard. Whoop, whoop. I got 34 years in the Guard myself, Chief Warrant Officer 4. Colorado National Guard and the United States Army. As a Colorado Guardsman, Mike worked multiple state emergencies, including fires, floods, tornadoes, and winter storms. His military experience also includes several overseas tours. He continues to serve as a traditional Colorado National Guardsman as the Assistant Adjutant General for Cyber, Space, and Missile Defense. Michael is a Colorado native and currently lives with his wife in Castle Rock. He has a Master of Science degree in Strategic Studies with the U.S. Army War College and a Master of Science in Space Systems Operation from Webster University, and also a Bachelor of Science in Psychology with the University of Colorado. All of those things, I'm sure he brings to bear in both his current job and his military role as well. So with that, again, here's Debbie Blyth and Michael Willis.
All right, thanks. Let's see, am I turned on here? All right, excellent. Well, thanks for having us. Thanks for letting us interrupt your lunch. Debbie and I have been going around the country to talk about this incident, this event that we had in Colorado, because really 2 reasons. And we like to do it together. We don't always get to do it together, but we like to do it together because we figured out pretty quickly that during the incident, we are going to end up doing it together. And so we go both to my community, the emergency management community, and when we're there, we tell them, hey, you really need to get to know your cybersecurity professionals, your cybersecurity community, and you need to start interacting with them. A lot like you do, it's more natural for emergency managers to talk to a county sheriff or a fire chief. I said, well, you got to talk to your CISO just like that. And then when we come to an audience like this, we say the opposite. You guys really need to go out and meet your emergency management professionals and meet your county and your municipal and your private sector and your state emergency management people so that you understand what they're doing. And so, and I think we're going to go through some slides, we're going to talk about that, but if there's one takeaway, wouldn't you say, Debbie? It's get to know each other really well, because odds are you're going to become friends.
That's right.
And so with that, let's see, let's talk about our, this is now April, so this is about 13 months ago when Debbie interrupted my Saturday afternoon. So we're going to go through, I think, just a couple of quick slides, and then we're going to take some time to listen to your thoughts on it and answer any questions you might have. So with that, these are our topics. How did it happen? What it did. That part will be pretty comfortable for you guys. Debbie will go through that, and you'll go, oh yeah, I know about that. When you do the emergency management community, they're like, what is that? So this will make a lot of sense to you. She'll walk you through the timeline. Then we'll talk about how we responded. And we'll talk about some things we learned, some things we didn't quite do right, which I think is important to talk about that, what we didn't nail. Then some things we did do much better, some things we did do well, and then some things we'd like you to think about as you leave here and go off into your world and patiently await your cyber attack. So Debbie, let's talk about how that happened.
So I will apologize in advance that you have to listen to me. My voice is not ever very good, but today it's really, really bad. So I want to talk about how it happened and what happened. So like many of you are doing, we are testing out and actually implementing systems in public cloud infrastructure. And so we had brought up a system in a public cloud, and it was to test a new business process for CDOT, for our Colorado Department of Transportation. Nothing wrong with that. The virtual server was connected to the CDOT network, actually as if it was an on-prem system. It was also connected, as you can see, to the internet. It was a test system, and it was only meant to be up for just a couple of weeks. So the system administrator, when he configured it, said, hey, it's not going to have any state data. It's not going to be a sensitive system. Just going to use it for a couple of weeks. So he didn't apply any of our standard security configuration controls. Uh-oh. And it was established using a domain administrator account. So the brute force attack began the day that system came online. And with 40,000 password attempts, within 48 hours it was compromised. And this became the attack vector that was utilized to access CDOT's primary domain controller and to push out the SamSam ransomware broadly throughout CDOT's business operations network. So here's the impact. It infected almost 1,300 laptops. It infected almost 350 servers, all of the databases, all of the applications, and it included voice over IP phones. Now, fortunately for us, this impacted CDOT's business operations, so all of their back office business functions were down. But it did not impact traffic operations. So that was something that was very helpful. We'll talk more about that later. But business operations is a big deal because CDOT processes $100 million in payments every single month. So that's about $80 million to their vendors and partners and about $20 million to their employees. So their SAP system, they could not get to. And so you think about that, how do you pay employees and contractors when you can't get to your SAP system? And then how do you communicate to internal and external stakeholders without email, without conference calls, without phones? And then how do you tell external contractors when we disconnected all of their network connections, and many of them utilize VPN, and we actually took down the VPN, and then later when we brought it back up, of course, we changed everybody's credentials. So those were some of the things we had to consider and deal with. So here's the timeline of the attack. February 18th, this was 2018, the virtual server was brought online. It came under attack, as I mentioned, the day it was brought up. By February 20th, 2 days later, the system was compromised. The attackers were into the CDOT environment. They were on the primary domain controller. They were logging on to various applications, databases, servers. They were just kind of poking around through the environment. We learned later they were probably looking for backup files, looking to destroy those. By February 21st, they determined that reconnaissance was over, and they were ready to push out the attack. So as you can imagine, February 21st was a terrible day. We were getting hundreds of phone calls to the help desk with individuals who had a pop-up message on their screen saying, so sorry, your files are encrypted, and if you want them back, you have to pay in Bitcoin. So hundreds of calls to the help desk. Now, CDOT leadership issued an email, sent out a broad email to their entire population and said, we don't know how big the scope is, we're under attack, everybody turn off your computers now. So everybody turned off their computers. So now we don't even know how big the attack is, really. So by February 24th, we had a lot of our vendor partners on site, and we actually worked through the weekend, attempting to ensure our security tools were up to date, our systems were up to date, and to try to make progress to combat this malware and to try to be in a position to restore CDOT. So by February 28th, a week later, we felt like we had containment in place. We were starting to actually bring systems back online and perform restoration. So we were actually really excited, and we walked around the building and we turned on all the computers, and then we went home. And we came back in the morning, to have all of our victorious feeling the night before just totally dashed, because we discovered on March 1st new attacker activity all over the network, continued infection, more systems encrypted. We actually didn't even know at first if this was SamSam or something else, because we thought we had all of our protections in place. We didn't think we could, we didn't think we were vulnerable anymore to SamSam. So by March 1st, it became very, very clear to me that we needed help. We could not do this by ourselves. And so that was at the point where I reached out to our Office of Emergency Management, and I did that because I wanted the National Guard on site. So for the state of Colorado, twice a year, we do exercises with the Colorado National Guard in which we do simulated cyber attacks, we do tabletop exercises, we do all kinds of those types of events. And so I was familiar with the Guard, and my team was familiar with the Guard, and we knew what kind of capabilities they could bring to bear, and we trusted them, we knew them, we knew they could help us. And so I reached out to Office of Emergency Management saying, hey, I'm gonna need the Colorado National Guard. So Office of Emergency Management reached out to the governor, who issued the first ever declaration of a state emergency based on a cyber event. So the very next day, the Colorado National Guard came on site along with the Office of Emergency Management, and they helped us to create a battle plan on how we were going to contain and eradicate and really recover from this ransomware event. We had a couple of incident command at that point. We had the Office of Information Technology, of which I'm a part. We had our incident command, and we were kind of cyber incident command. CDOT had their incident command, so they said, we realize this is going to be a long-term event. We need to continue to run the business, whether it's on paper and pen. We need to continue to run the business. We need our own incident command, so we're going to do our thing over here. You guys do your thing over here, and we'll meet periodically and talk about it. So very quickly during that first week, Office of Emergency Management said, hey, we think we should establish a unified command group so that we can kind of, align these two incident commands and have one command structure, which made a lot of sense. So we did that on March 5th. And Director Mike Willis became our incident commander. March 6th, we had declared containment and we started restoring services. By the following Monday, March 9th, the National Guard and all of our vendor partners were departing. Over the next couple of weeks, we continued to restore services. And then by March 23rd, we had 80% restoration of CDOT services. So if you look, that means we spent about 2 weeks containing and eradicating the malware, and then about 2 weeks performing recovery of services.
All right, so if you want to have a really awkward conversation with your governor, go ask for an emergency declaration for a cyber incident. That always goes well. That's how you end up being the incident commander. But it turned out to be about the right thing. So we'll talk a little bit about how we responded when we kind of got ourselves organized here. And this is important to kind of wrap your mind around, because I imagine most of you in this audience look at that slide and say, well, I'm over here on the right-hand side where it says cyber incident response. Good. But don't lose sight. And when I talk to the emergency management community, they're like, I never heard of that. I'm over here and I do that emergency response stuff. And then when we talk to the private sector, or we talk to a municipality or the department, they're like, well, we do continuity of operations and we got the business thing going on here. And that's an important thing to get your head around. You're a part of a team, you're part of an overall incident. Yeah, it's a cyber incident, but this thing manifests itself in the physical world, and that's what your business partner is dealing with. And there's a way to kind of cope with that. We'll talk about that. So if you look at that, those are the priorities, right? So the business response, what are their priorities? Continuity of operations, right? Internal, like Debbie said, can't pay their employees. Let me tell you, that's a morale problem. Which one of you wants to hear, well, I don't know about your paycheck this month because I can't get into the application that pays you. Now, the HR director for the Colorado Department of Transportation never cared once about what application he was using, what server it was riding on, what information it was in, until that morning. And then he cared a whole lot. Now, to be fair, when Debbie's team responded, they didn't care that he cared. Hey, we got a bunch of servers, we got to figure this thing out. He's like, no, I got to pay people. They're like, no, we got to contain. Like, contain what? I'm trying not to contain their paychecks. And so it's easy to kind of talk past each other. What's next? Their recovery priorities. They're not the same, right? So Debbie, she has to, number one, no matter what, under all circumstances, secure the state network. At this point, she had set up a good system ahead of time, and so we had good segmentation, and it was not out of CDOT, and we committed our lives to making sure it didn't get out of CDOT. That was Debbie's number one priority. No matter what, don't let it out. Secure the Colorado State Network, eradicate, secure CDOT, rebuild. Not the same as operate the financial systems. Protect the traffic control system. Get back to business. Tired of having stacks this high of computers that don't work. I need to get back to business. So, when you deal with something like this, here's why I always try to say, and Debbie and I will talk about this, go find your emergency manager. You see us there at the bottom? What do? We're supposed to do this. How well we do it depends. Hit or miss. Understand the problem set. So the first thing we did when we stood up the Unified Command is we all went into a classroom and we all got on the white. We would have done it on a computer, but Debbie wouldn't let us. So we all got on a whiteboard, and the executive staff for the Department of Transportation wrote down all their priorities. Debbie and her team wrote down all their priorities. And the emergency manager walked up with a pen and looped and grouped. You ever done the loop and group exercise where you put things together, you try to find commonalities, and you figure out what parts can go with what other parts and what parts don't fit? And we spent 2 hours understanding the stakeholders and developing common priorities. Normally, your emergency manager will then put those common priorities on a slide to project against on a screen somewhere. Unless it's a cyber incident, then he will write it on 47 pieces of butcher paper and tape it to every wall. Why would I do that? Why would I write the common priorities and literally tape it? You'll see pictures later. Honestly, taped it to every wall. It is really easy to go down the rabbit hole, right? Cyber folks do it, business folks do it, emergency managers do it, and somebody has to stand in the middle and say, is that on that list? Do you see what you're doing as being a part of one of those things on the list? And then you create unity of effort, right? When everyone's working off the same list, you have unity of effort. And then your emergency managers, by and large, are really good at that last one. Because trust me, this doesn't just work out perfectly where everyone says, oh yeah, well that's it, we'll just go from here. You have to work your way through that. And you have to have somebody who kind of referees through that. And your emergency managers are pretty good at that. We're more accustomed to doing it with county sheriffs and fire battalion chiefs, but yeah, it's all kind of refereeing, right? And so we spent a lot of time working through the nuances of those priorities to make sure that we could maintain unity of effort. Does that kind of make sense as you look through the three components of an incident? And by the way, those are three components of any incident. I call it, I tell people, don't look at it like a cyber thingy. If you're talking to emergency managers, you have to say it like that. So don't look at it like a cyber thingy. Look at it like an incident. And if you can tell your emergency manager folks this, look at it like an incident, because then they know what to do. If you say, well, it's a cyber thing, well, they're like, say it's an incident, and then they have a better idea of what they should do. All right, so I drew it up, said this is what it's going to look like. Got the governor's office, we've got the Unified Command Group, CDOT Incident Command Post, right? We'll talk about acronyms in a few minutes. And Debbie and the CISO and the Cyber Incident Response Team, and then Debbie will talk a little bit about how she got her teams organized together, and they all have those little pieces and parts together. So it looks pretty good, right? That should work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should work.
That should work.
but it really kind of ended up more like this. And we had a lot of fun with it. Now, we say that now.
Afterwards.
Afterwards, it was more fun. We had some really interesting things happen, and they were pretty cool. As you see, kind of on the very far right, Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, without a Stafford Act declaration, both sent assets to the state of Colorado to help. And that was really very helpful. They sent a hunt and incident response team from DHS. FEMA gave us a bunch of communication stuff. One of the lessons I learned, do not put your unified command post in the one building that you just disconnected from Earth. So I had a communications problem, and FEMA helped me with that. The third-party vendors, all doing good work, all have a kind of a different job. Who here's a third party? Who's a vendor? Raise your hand. All right, y'all got program managers you got to report to, right? You got people that you got to talk to back at the mothership, right? Turns out those people call the governor directly without talking to the Unified Incident Commander first. And then the governor calls me. And so if you're on site and your program manager does that, just know I'm going to get a little excited about it. Yeah. So I learned that. And then you kind of see we're all over the map here, right? But we're all talking to each other. And this actually turned out to work pretty good. We'll talk a little bit more about the media. I remember all those horrible stories that were in the newspapers and on the TV about us. It really wasn't that bad, right? Our PIOs got their act together, public information officers got their act together. They started working together in a joint information system, and we really did well with the media. So you should think about that. Who's talking to the media? What's your message? What are you saying? That can save you a tremendous amount of pain. All right. So what does a cyber unified command look like? When I talk to the emergency management community, I always say, because they all think it's a bunch of unusual-looking people with hoodies that are drinking and sit in the basement. So I use some of these pictures to show them, hey, it really looks like Emergency Operations Center. No, really, it looks like we had at one point 125 responders in there.
Yeah.
And so here we are working away. The gentleman with the ball cap on and the blue shirt, that's the executive director of the Department of Transportation. He's providing some guidance to his folks, but look who all's in the room, right? Those are vendors, that are National Guardsmen, that is Debbi's team, and it is his team. Go ahead to the next one there, Debbi.
So, one thing I was going to mention is we actually went into the CDOT building and took over the CDOT auditorium. So we moved all these tables in, and we had everybody sitting in there together. And as more and more folks showed up, we brought more tables in.
A lot of people there. Here we are. That looks like an ops brief, doesn't it? A couple of things about your ops brief. Again, if you look across the room, about 2/3 of those folks are technical folks. The other ones are probably from CDOT. There's a couple of folks from my office that are just planners. So they're not all cybersecurity professionals. You have to be very thoughtful about that when you talk. And I am very fortunate because Debbi actually speaks English. But not all of you do. And you have to be careful about how you articulate things. So what's a TCP to you guys? Transmission Control Protocol? I think I saw law enforcement over here. Yeah, traffic control point, right? So if you just say TCP, how about ICS? Industrial Control System or Incident Command System. If you say it to an emergency manager, his head goes right to Incident Command System. But that's not what you're talking about. So be thoughtful about that. Containment. If your emergency manager has a fire background, he's going to ask you what percent and how long and how much more water do I need. Eradication. Now, if you're in Colorado and you're in law enforcement, that means you found an illegal pot shot and you eradicated it. But it doesn't mean the same thing. So speaking plain English is a super important thing. We all have our code words, and it makes us feel cool that we can use them. Save it for happy hour when the incident's over. Speak plain English in the meantime. or you'll cause confusion. You'll get different results than you expect. And you don't have time for that. You're going to be too tired and grouchy about it anyway. So think about that. What's my next picture? Yeah, this is okay. We're going to talk about this. This is fun. Debbie's going to talk a little bit about it in a minute too. Now this happens, if you're an emergency manager, this happens in every incident. Something cool must have just happened right near that guy in the yellow shirt, right? Now, I don't know what it is, but everybody ran right over there to go look at it. Now your emergency manager is going to freak out when that happens, because who's doing their job? And so I kind of show this picture to say, hey, I'm sure whatever happened to the guy in the yellow shirt is cool, but play your lane. Watch your lane. This one guy right here, whoops,
sorry,
go back
I went backwards.
This guy right here sitting there looking at like, what are these guys doing behind he's the only guy playing his lane right now. So think about that when you're running an operations centers. Make sure people stay in your lane. This next one is great. All right, I like to show these three people because not a single one of them is a cybersecurity professional. And they kind of form this little nucleus of an operations center. The gentleman who's back to us is from Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. The lady who's facing us is also from Jefferson County Emergency Management. And the young lady, kind of see her profile, you know what she's doing? Finances. This thing costs money. And so she is tracking all the finances because we had a state declaration and we were going to have to account for all the money we spent and ask for reimbursement. And just know that all of that is going on all around you. None of them have a degree in cybersecurity or any of those CISSI, SSIOs, IEIO certifications that you guys get. It was pretty cool. I want one. So I kind of go through those pictures to show you all the things that are going on around you that will interact with your cybersecurity professional world during an incident.
Yeah, and in fact, Director Willis called me and he said, one of the things we're going to need is a documentation unit. Do you have a documentation unit? And I said, oh, golly, I don't think I have one of those. And he said, well, I'm going to bring one then. And it turns out she's a person.
Who knew, right?
Yeah.
All right. So now we'll talk about some things that I think are important, some things we would do differently, things we learned. So Debbie showed you the timeline, right? I left Debbie hanging for 5 days. Don't let your emergency manager do that to you. I look back at that incident and I think to myself, geez, if that had been a fire, I wouldn't have waited 5 days. If it had been a terrorist complex coordinated terrorist attack, I wouldn't have waited 5 days. If it had been a flash flood, I wouldn't have waited 5 minutes. So why did I wait 5 days? Because it was a cyber thingy. I'd never do that to her again because one, she'd kill me. I don't even know why she's still friends with me, to be honest with you. But two, that's part of our cultural problem, the gap between emergency management and cybersecurity. I didn't view it as an incident soon enough. And I won't ever do that again. I always tell the emergency management community, don't leave your CISO hanging like I did. So and you can poke at him. You should call, hey, I think I got an incident here, and you might want to saddle up there, Hoss. That's emergency management speak for pack your bag. So that's one way I would definitely do different. I think, Debbie, you're going to talk about the other ones on this slide.
Yeah, so definitely define lanes and organize by tasks. So one of the things you may not be able to see in the pictures is we actually put like all of our teams together in teams. So our network team, our endpoint team, our server administration team, put them together and put a sign on the table so that everybody knew who was where, and also assigned things that those teams were going to work on. And then we had a time of accountability, so the daily ops meetings where we would come together, and we actually did this multiple times a day, where we would kind of give a readout. Each team would read out what they had done. That was very, very helpful. The other thing is clarifying lanes and roles with the vendors sooner. So we had 4 vendors on site, 3 endpoint vendors, 1 firewall vendor. We had a professional incident response team. And in the very beginning, all of them were kind of in competition. So all of our endpoint vendors, man, they were trying to prove the worth of their tool sets. And so they were all trying to find it faster, come up with something better, and they really were not working together very well. So Director Willis caught sight of that, brought them all into a room together, and we call this a come to Director Willis meeting. And told them, hey, we think we're all here for the same reason, which is to get CDOT operational again. Is anybody not here for that reason? And then he said, I'm going to need you guys to work together. And all of them actually realized, hey, we actually are there for that reason. We are there to try to restore CDOT. So what can we do to help? And so we ended up even using one vendor's product to push out another vendor's tool set. Because Director Willis would say, okay, you vendors, what I need is a tool that can do something like this. Who's got something that can do that? And they would raise their hand and say, here's what my tool can do, and here's how I can help. And so we were actually able to use kind of the best capabilities of each of the tool sets that we had on site to bring CDOT operational again.
One of the other things that took us a little bit longer than it probably should have was to synchronize our operational rhythm. So we had an incident command post being run by the Department of Transportation. They had their rhythm of when they were going to brief each other, do their coordination brief, and then when they were going to communicate with their employees, and then when they were going to do their public information tools development. And the cyber response had their rhythm, and it was doing one thing, and then I came in and imposed a third rhythm on top of all of that for the Unified Coordination Group. Eventually we got to where we sorted that out, but I will tell you, it took too long. We had meetings on top of meetings, so the right person couldn't attend this meeting because they had to be at that meeting. So think about that as you're structuring your operational rhythms. Is again, it was a symptom of not being used to working with just different components and pieces, and just looking at it myopically from our own swim lanes and not seeing the impacts on the others. So we kind of got that fixed, but it took us a long time. So keep that in mind.
And then lastly, one of the things we would do differently is stop chasing the bad guys sooner. So of course, you can think of these cyber folks and they get all excited, like there's a bad guy on the network and we're going to find him. And we started to notice every blip and every anomaly and everything that didn't seem normal all over the network. And so even in that picture, that was a good picture of what was actually happening. We would run over here and we would investigate this one little thing, and then we'd notice something over there and we'd run over there and investigate that one little thing. And what we ended up with was a full page of half-baked ideas about what could be involved, what the scope was, what all the components meant. And we didn't know if any of it was true or if it was false. And so with the help of the operational emergency management team, they helped us to put all that down on paper. Here was an assumption, here's an assumption, here's an assumption. And then they helped us assign appropriate resources to go and prove or disprove each of those assumptions so that we could get our arms around what actually is this and what are all the things that are involved in this attack. And at one point, we had dug in so deep that we had chased this all the way down to a single IP address, a home address, and a telephone number, and we were getting ready to call the foreign police in that other country and send them to that guy's house, right? And Director Willis said, wait a minute, let's extract ourselves back up a level. If you have that kind of information, turn it over to the FBI, who was on site with us. We gave it to them. He said, those guys are going to chase the bad guy. You guys, what are our priorities? And he pointed to the butcher block on the wall. It was on every single wall. And priority 1 was something like keep CDOT operational. The components of CDOT that are operational, keep them operational. Protect the rest of the state. Restore CDOT's capabilities. He said, how does chasing the bad guy fit in with those priorities? And so it was just a reminder that having those priorities, like the 5 priorities, agreed upon and pasted to every single wall, kind of brought us back up a level. The other thing is that before, when we were seeing little blips and anomalies, we were truly diverting all resources. So the entire network security team would go and investigate here and then go and investigate here. And so it was really kind of pulling us in every direction. And so with the Office of Emergency Management, we created an operations team, and they had a sign on their table And we would take whatever anomaly it was up to the operations team and say, here's what we think we have. And they would look at it and kind of evaluate through that list of critical priorities and then say, okay, I agree, we need to follow up on this. Take 2 people, go and follow up, come back and tell me in a half an hour what it is. So it really did force us to make sure that we were focused on those priorities, that we had the resources allocated in the right place, and that we were chasing to ground everything that we thought might be part of the issue. So what we would do again. So firstly, coordinating the external message was so critical because as Director Willis said at the very beginning, the media was very, very kind to us. And it's because we realized right away we could not ignore them. They were calling for an update. In fact, the very first day, like within the first 2 hours, the media starts calling. And so I can't even do my job. I can't even help the team with incident response because I'm being pulled out by my public information officer to go answer some media inquiries. Eventually, what we figured out is we needed to get her up to speed on the incident. And then she was actually able to handle those in a much more coordinated manner to where I didn't have to get pulled out of incident response constantly. And the other thing is that the media was also calling, so there were 2 agencies involved, right? There was the Governor's Office of Information Technology, who was fighting the cyber incident, but there was CDOT. And so they were calling our PIO, and they were calling their PIO, and they were just looking for any piece of information that might be, you know, some loose thread or interesting tidbit or something that they could exploit. So right away, we realized we had to get them on the same page, and they had to communicate the same message. And so that was very helpful, and that was another reason I think that the media was helpful to us. The other thing was issuing an EMac. So one of the reasons that I was so thrilled and honored to be able to come out and talk to California today is because Director Willis came to me and he said, you know, your guys are getting tired and they've been at this 18 hours a day, including weekends, and we're getting to the point where we can start doing restoration and your guys are burned out. We're gonna need to issue an EMac. And I said, okay, I don't know what that is, but if you think it's a good idea, let's do it. Well, it turns out an EMac is a request for personnel. That's all it is. And so we, you know, quickly wrote out job descriptions. We think we need 2 DBAs. We think we need a couple system administrators, network administrators. Here's the kind of familiarity we're looking for. We issued that nationwide, and we had many states reach out to us. But California reached out and said, we want to send you a team of people and a team lead who, in a coordinated manner, can do all the things that you're talking about. And it was very clear to us that they brought us the A team. So California shows up. They were able to sit down with our individuals who were actually performing different functions, sit beside them for a couple of hours, watch what they did, and then take over. And because of the EMac and because of the California A team, we were actually able to restore CDOT faster than anyone thought possible. And my infrastructure teams told me that multiple times. They're like, thank you so much for calling California. They helped us so much. So we were very grateful, so thank you for that. The other thing that I would do is I would call in Office of Emergency Management for logistics coordination. So I mentioned earlier that I called in Office of Emergency Management for one reason, which was just to get the National Guard on site. I had no idea all these other capabilities they could bring. So if you can imagine the first couple of days into the event, you know, we're starting to realize it's 6 p.m. These guys probably haven't eaten anything. We better order some pizza. You know, day 2, it's noon. They're probably not leaving this room. We better order some pizza. Day 3, they said, we are sick of pizza. We are eating no more pizza. Get us some other food. And so it was up to me, the Chief Information Security Officer, or the Chief Technology Officer, or the Director of Infrastructure to go coordinate meals. And the team expanded. So originally there were 5 people on site. That was not a big deal. Then there were 10. Then there were 15. Then there were 25. And I am driving all around the state trying to find like chicken for 25 people. Or the director, you know, the CTO or the Director of Infrastructure was doing this. And we realized, you know, this is pulling us away from what we should be doing. We're trying to coordinate food. Then we got smart. We said, hey, our admins can do this. So then we called over to the office and said, hey, can you get some meals in here? We've got about, I don't know, 30 people on site. So they would start ordering meals, which was awesome, except that we had way too much food. Now we're running around the building trying to find refrigerator space for all the leftovers. And so right away when Office of Emergency Management came in, they were looking around the room and they were like, what is going on in here? And I'm like, what? We're working. They said, you guys are drinking Red Bull and you're eating candy. Like, how is this healthy? So they had pallets of water delivered. And it turned out we were dehydrated and we had no idea. And once we got the water in there, we were drinking it like crazy. And we realized, hey, I can think a lot clearer now. They also came in and noticed that we had, with way too much food, we had generated a lot of trash. And looked around and trash cans were overflowing and there was trash everywhere. And they said, how are there not rats in this place? Like, what are you guys doing? They coordinated things like janitorial service to come in and remove all the trash. The other thing is they installed a badge reader system and issued badges for all of the emergency management folks and all of the incident response folks. So that we could tell right away looking around the room who was supposed to be in the room and who was not supposed to be in the room, because we all had these yellow badges. The other thing is we badged in and we badged out, so we knew exactly how many people were there and exactly how many meals we needed to have. And they, Office of Emergency Management, started ordering all the food for us. And so they were catering food that was much more healthy, food that was appropriate for the size of our group. And we had, not as much food left over. So then later, of course, that badging system was incredibly important because later on, as we talked about, we had to figure out how much did this event cost. And so we knew exactly who was on site, how many hours, who was there to support us. We were able to track all of that. We were able to come down to a finite dollar amount of what it costs us. We were also able later, when I organized an event to thank all of the people who responded to help, I was able to tell exactly who those people were and be sure that I didn't leave anybody out. And then lastly, I would say, establishing the priorities early and then posting them on the wall. I mean, that is just something so, get out a piece of butcher paper, write out what those 5 priorities are, and then post it where people can see it all over. That was so helpful because we could take every piece of new information and run it down that list of 5 and go, nope, I'm spending no time on this because those are my priorities. So that was really helpful. So key takeaways. You're going to want to obviously define your cyber incident response team. And I would say we had a very good computer incident response plan. We pulled that out. We executed that. But even with a very good plan, you're going to realize as you're acting out a real incident that you've left people off of there. And you're going to want to clarify who does what. And we had to take our plan and get much more granular, much more specific, and add in a bunch of information that was in there. And obviously, you want to rehearse that. And some of the things that we realized is in all of our execution of the plan before, we never included the business. We never brought in a business partner and said, what are your priorities as we're doing these things? What are your priorities? So the other thing that we never did is we never brought in our vendors and said, how are you going to help us when this type of thing happens? How do we reach you? How do we engage you? What can you bring to bear? So we'd never addressed those things before as well. So those are things that you're going to want to make sure you have in your incident response plan.
One of the things I ask you guys to do is somebody in your organization is responsible for developing your continuity of operation plan. And it's probably, for your overall organization, it's probably not you. Go find out who it is and talk to them. Because it's so important to address cyber and a cyber incident in your continuity operations or continuity of operations plan. It's not just an IT thing, and they'll forget. And they don't clearly understand what's at risk and what they will do. So I told you a story about the HR manager running down the hallway going, oh my God, I can't pay anybody. He had no idea that was going to happen. Had he coordinated with his cybersecurity professional and says, well, if this goes down, takes that server with it, this application doesn't work with it. That thing you like to play with on your computer that pays people doesn't work either. He didn't know that. So work with them. They won't make those connections unless you help them. And so talk to them about what's at risk and then what can you do about that? What should they do about that? And this guy, Johnny Hilson, who is one of the senior executives in CDOT, this is a great quote, right? Our coop is better suited for a meteor than for a cyber attack. Now think that through. A meteor seems kind of bad. I would at least know to stand up a unified command group right away. So what did he mean by that? Well, we'll give you a little anecdotal story. Their employees, very well trained, I was very impressed that they had read the coop so carefully that they knew exactly what to do when they were told to execute the coop plan. They were going to take their laptop computer that they had taken home last night, and they were going to go over to the Department of Public Health, and they were going to plug into the network and get busy again because they got work to do. What's the worst possible thing that could have happened? For them to do exactly what they were told to do. The worst possible thing would have been for them to follow instructions, because they would have put their computer right there on CDPH's network, and we'd have lost containment. And we spent 3 days trying to make sure that didn't happen.
Yeah.
They were trained to do that. It's not malicious or bad people. They were trained to do that. Why were they trained to do that? Because they never integrated a cybersecurity professional into their COOP planning. So reach out to your partners. Make sure they don't make mistakes like that. They all do want to do well, and it turns out people read COOP plans. I always accuse them of not reading it, so now I know they did. So that's a biggie, so help them with that. We talked already about cyber emergency management and business responses. Debbie and I did a bunch of exercises together. We now know you got to bring in that business partner and ask them, hey, if you have an attack, what are your priorities? What's the most important things to you? What are your business imperatives that will be affected? If we'd have guessed wrong, and we never asked. So when you do an exercise, think about reaching out to a business partner so you can start wrapping your mind around that sort of thing. Mitigation is a real emergency management term, right? We talk about mitigation all the time. We like to mitigate things. We like to mitigate fires. We like to mitigate floods. We like to mitigate terrorist attacks. We like to mitigate school shootings. We just like to mitigate stuff. So why don't we mitigate for cyber? Debbi did, and it saved Colorado's backside. The number one reason, wouldn't you say, that we didn't pay the ransom is because she had secure backup that she could validate and ensure that we could put back on the computers when we brought them up and not reinfect them, that they were safe. That, when you talk to your emergency manager, he's going to say, well, I don't know how to mitigate for that. Say, well, this is how you do it. You do secure backup. That was a big deal for us. Where I talk about this, remind your emergency management professional, it's an incident, just act like it. Stop acting like it's cyber thingy. We'll do that. You guys do cyber thingies, right? Tell your emergency managers, it's an incident, deal with it. People need to eat, people need water, people may need places to sleep, people probably need the trash taken out. People need a referee. People need someone to coordinate the public information message. That's what your emergency manager brings to the table. Don't let them off the hook. Because they'll want to say, ooh, that's cyber thingies. That's gross. I always say, isn't there a shot for that? And then the last thing, public information officers matter. They will reduce your pain level substantially, but you got to help them. Your public information officer has a very low probability of also being a cybersecurity professional. So you got to help them. You got to help them understand what is going on and how is that best messaged, both internally. The CDOT PIO spent an enormous amount of energy messaging internally to their employees. Yeah, someday you will get paid. I don't know which day, but someday. There's a way to say that to people. That's why I don't let the emergency manager talk in public much, because he says just like that. But externally, internally, bring your PIOs in, but you got to empower them to be successful. Don't blow them off. That's media, just tell them no comment. Yeah, well, they'll get a comment. It just won't be from you. So integrate your PIOs into what you're doing and help them understand the problem set so they can help you. All right, that's what we know. In retrospect, it really was a pretty good time.
It was the best time I hope never to repeat ever again.
But I think we're pretty confident that it'll happen to you guys.
Yeah, sadly. sadly.
And
we're pretty confident it'll happen to us again.
yeah. I don't know, I'm pretty close to retirement. So I think at this time, what we'd like, if there's time, we would take questions.
Yeah. One in the back
there.
there.
Yep.
Do you have a privacy officer, and if so, when do you involve them in your incident management?
That's a great question. So we do not have like a state privacy officer. There's very few states that do, but each agency that has information that is typically that's regulated information has a privacy officer. And so had CDOT been one of those agencies that had a privacy officer, we would have engaged them right away. They would need to be involved because obviously we'd want them looking quickly at what kind of information, if any, was exposed, and then what does that mean?
Yeah. We've encountered that in the emergency management community too, and you just bring them in like a special staff into your operations center and park them.
I was curious about the diversity of platforms that were compromised. You mentioned IP phones, desktops, servers. Is it a specific platform, or was it diverse? Were they able to compromise multiple platforms?
So it was mainly Windows systems that were compromised. In fact, it was 100% Windows systems. Now, the reason that voice over IP phones were affected is we had to take the network down. And so that took down, I mean, even SAP wasn't affected, but we took the network down so no one could get to it anymore. So that's really kind of where, you know, part of it was what had happened to us, and part of it is what we did to ourselves. Yeah.
On February 28th, you thought you had it contained. On March 1st, you realized you didn't.
Yes.
A week later, you had it contained.
Yes.
What did you miss on the 28th, and how did you know that you had it contained a week later?
That's a great question. So what we did when the Office of Emergency Management and National Guard came on site, we said, how are we going to know when we're contained, and what does that mean? And so what we did was we built a test network, and we started moving systems onto that test network. We put a domain controller, we put clean systems, and then we said what containment means to us is that we're going to have to go turn on all these computers that have been turned off. We know we're going to have instances of malware that is going to now infect the network or potentially infect the network. So what containment meant to us is that as we brought those systems up, that it would be quarantined and not able to talk to anything else. And so we tested that. We brought in systems that we knew were infected on that clean test network and brought them up to watch what would happen. And so that's how we knew we had containment. We knew that our tools were working and that we could contain anything that, you know, still existed that was infected.
So, first of all, thank you for being transparent and sharing all of this. I thought it was fascinating. One of the things that you said early on was that how your HR director really, didn't care about what application or what platform it was on, or really had to focus on the technology, and how emergency management didn't respond to this incident like it would have a terrorist incident or a flood or something else. My question is, did this incident cause a change in perspective in the way that people looked at technology or the cyberspace? And then secondly, did it last? Is it a lasting impact? People see things differently?
I would say yes and yes. In the change, the perspective change, I think mostly I would couch this way. The non-IT professionals realized the impacts, the physical world impacts, the physical consequences of a cyber incident. Prior to that, I think many of us and lots of folks, it just wasn't viewed as something that manifested itself in the physical world. Yeah, it's another cyber attack. Yeah, someone stole my identity again. Yeah, I get a year of free monitoring. Yeah, whatever. And so no one feels any kind of immediate pain for that. And so when this happened, and the HR director, as an example, suddenly realizes you can't pay, literally can't pay people. That's a physical world impact. Their business operations unit couldn't pay contractors. Contractors don't like to not get paid. So that's a physical world impact. And then the realization, and we were fortunate this did not happen, that it could it didn't take much of a mental leap for them to get to, hey, if this gets into our traffic operations center, we're going to lose control of our tunnels. We're going to lose control of, they don't run the city lights, those are all on a separate network, but some of the metering lights, there are life safety impacts. So, and that hasn't been lost so to your second question, have we been able to maintain that? Yes, because now I think, now when we read in the paper, well, Albany, right, Albany, capital of New York, we're like, oh, we know what that feels like. We know what those impacts are. So it gets refreshed in our minds because now when you read about some other incident, it just reinforces some of the lessons I think the non-technical lessons that we drew out.
Yeah.
I was curious if you're able to share the cost of recovery.
So we, I'll give you the political line. It's between 1.5 million and 2 million. And it's like right in the middle.
That's pretty transparent.
What was the public impact? I mean, outside of not being able to pay the contractors or vendors, was there any impact on the general population?
No.
Yeah, we kept it really, there's
Yeah.
one, but it was weirdly positive. A very positive impact. We tried not to talk about it. Remember when we disconnected the toll road contractor?
Oh, yeah.
Because, we had to disconnect them from the network, so Coloradans got to drive on some of our toll roads for free. We just didn't tell them.
But yeah, because that's one thing we didn't mention is we had good network segmentation. So that's what kept it isolated to the CDOT Business Operations Network. That's why it didn't bleed over into traffic ops. So it didn't have the public impact that a lot of other events that you've heard of have had. So that was very fortunate for us. Yeah.
So looking back, do you view it as a small miss of process or tools or a large miss of process or tools?
So that's a great question. For us, there were a few things that led to it. Obviously, abuse of privileged accounts. Obviously, some failure of some of the tools. I would say that the biggest feeling that I had about what we needed to do better going forward was we needed to execute faster on security projects. Because we had projects underway. So we had a privileged access management project underway. We had a role-based access management project underway. We had a two-factor authentication project underway. We had just purchased an endpoint detection and response tool set that would have caught and contained it. We were executing by department, so it was agency by agency, rolling that out very methodically. We were due to implement to CDOT the week after the SamSam ransomware event hit. So when that happened, I just threw out that project plan and we just pushed out to the state, which is what we should have done to start with. So that was kind of my message to the legislature is we have to be faster at executing security projects. I can't ask my system administrator who works 8 hours a day on system administration to take the last 15 minutes of his day and chunk away at my security project for years. That's not getting me where I need to be. So we're actually going to start building some tiger teams, some very focused teams to actually go and execute security projects faster so that we're not in this situation again. Because we had all the right things underway, they just weren't complete. Yeah.
You mentioned a handoff to the FBI. Did this event result in prosecution or that disappointment when trying to
Yeah.
Indictment.
That's a great question.
Yeah. The FBI, the Attorney General's office handed down an indictment against 2 Iranian nationals in November.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
about 6 months later.
Yeah. So that was really exciting. And I like to feel like we had a part in that because, we turned over absolutely everything we had to the FBI. They assured us they had a specific office that was working on the SamSam ransomware variants. And so sure enough, 6 or 8 months later when they handed down that indictment, we felt very victorious. Anything else? Okay.
All right, guys, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
just real quick tag on that. So Colorado, again, thank them incredibly, but also know that they've made their after-action review available publicly. So it's available on their, go to the CIOs, CISOs website in Colorado and take a look at that. It's publicly available. It's been scrubbed, so you're more than welcome to that. All right, thank you.